for all your support during the week, for all the likes and the feedback from last week's episode. We had the brilliant John O'Connor on. His introduction and the achievements he has are too long to list, but we talked about neuroscience and pharmacology. And I guess we talked a little bit about something I wasn't really expecting to do with, medication and mental health, and kind of mental health on the UCD campus, which is another thing which I had no idea about, but it sounds like a UCD are looking after their students in that way, but there's always room for improvement with these things. So hopefully it continues to go that way. But anyway, we'll get on with this week. This week's guest is the author of the acclaimed debut novel, Boys Don't Cry. Fiona, Scarlett, how are you?
Good. Thanks so much for having me on. Delighted to be here.
You're more than welcome. Like I said to you just before we recorded, there's a few people definitely be listening to this, with great interest, because of your novel and how much they enjoyed it and stuff like that. But we always start at the very beginning. Can you give us a short history of your upbringing, please?
Yeah, so I'm from originally out Huntstown in Dublin 15 is where I'm from. And we moved when I was about 12 to literally down the road to Hartstown. So that's basically where I'm from, just sort of normal family life, standard three bed semi. That's basically it. Very, very happy childhood. And even though I went into writing, and writing is something that I never thought that I'd get into, we were sort of always encouraged just to go for, stuff that you love doing and all that type of thing. So real lovely memories of growing up, playing around with the kids in the estate, all that type of thing. I was telling my daughter there about when we were growing up, they used to have the big bonfires on the green for Halloween, and we'd be there for like the whole month of October, probably from September, knocking on people's doors looking for the wood to gather for the bonfire, and we'd all keep it in each other's back gardens, and then we go and it'd be building a big bonfire and then setting a light, and it's just so that's what I used to do when I was their age, and it's so different now, for reasons, of course. But like I hadn't even really thought about that until she was talking about, oh, what did you used to do like when you were my age at Halloween? So yeah, no, very sort of normal, standard upbringing, really.
Good. That's a good answer. That's what we want to hear. Could I ask the question then about the bonfire? Because this is one of those things that I was kind of thinking about myself because of next week's guest. But there's like we used to do the same thing, obviously. But I went to school in Swords, so I used to miss the bonfires there because we came down to Athlone for the Halloween break. Did you have the kind of thing where you get raided by other estates and stuff?
Oh yeah,
Oh
there
yeah,
was a big massive rivalry. So we had our estate, like Hunstown rises where I was, and like we had a big green in front of our house, but the opposite side of the road, they would always be yeah, you'd have to
yeah,
have you literally had people, all the kids manned on it to
yeah.
mind to mind the stuff for the bonfire. And you'd always have like the chair at the top with some poor unfortunate teddy that got put at the
Mm.
very, very top the whole time. And then you'd have I don't know if you used to have the street parties and stuff like that too. And
No.
we used to have mad rivalry with that too. So you'd have a street party and basically it was just everyone going out in the green and the adults like drinking away and the kids just running wild. But again, there'd be rivalry because people from other streets would be coming up for ours, but then you try to get into theirs, and again,
Mm.
people would be very territorial. Like, but yeah, it's mad that it's changed so much in such a short space of time. And I remember then you always had that constant black scorched part
Yeah,
on the green, and
yeah.
it's so different now. Like it's just yeah.
Yeah, I miss those circular springs of mattresses you would see just sitting there and throwing Lynx cans into the fire and the
Oh
anticipation of the
yeah.
explosion. It was yeah, but like obviously a lot of things have changed for the good for for safety's sake and
Oh, of
for
course, and the environment and everything,
environment.
of course, yeah.
But you kind of, I suppose now I don't have any kids, but like it's kind of a shame for the youngsters growing up that they do miss a little bit of that.
It's the freedom, I think, as well.
Mm,
Because I see mine now, it's like lots of their interaction is online as well. So they'd be chatting, like gaming and chatting online with
mm,
each other or whatever, that type of thing. But like when we were growing up, you were just out all the time. You had a lot more freedom as well.
yeah.
There was no phones. There was no way of keeping in touch. You'd get the shout at when it started getting dark that you had to
Yeah.
come in again. So that type of freedom, I think, it's just not the same as what it was, and it allowed you a lot more independence as
Mm.
well. I think, but yeah,
Yeah, well, we do sound like a couple of old fogies here.
Albums.
So so we'll quickly move on to the next. But Fiona, so for you then, when did you first become aware of mental health?
Oh, do you know, that's a really interesting question because like I find myself like I'd be quite content to myself and I've never really suffered badly with mental health, I don't think. But at the same time, I was asked this before and sort of reflecting back on things. Like I'm definitely I've always found it really, really hard to say no. So I'm definitely a
Mm,
pleaser and sort of would find myself constantly doing things to avoid confrontation and find it very, very difficult to say no. And I remember being in work and I was sort of in a situation where I had a lot more what would you say responsibilities than I normally had. So we set up a special class in our school for children with additional needs, and there was an awful lot of work involved in that. And I found myself just on burnout nearly after a couple of years. It was like I was running on empty, and I was like, I'm going to have to do something here because people had said to me as well, like I sort of moved on, I was doing different, and then the writing took over and other things took over. But it was only when I was out on it again that people were saying, like, you were like a completely different person. You just weren't yourself. You were like a shell of yourself. So I think that was it, even though I thought that, oh, like everything with me is fine. Obviously, it's not, and learning to sort of, you need to mind yourself in
mhm.
situations as well. And it's okay to say no, like, you can't possibly be able to do everything and be everything for everybody that everybody wants you to be. Like you can only do what you can do, and that's it. And with the writing, then as well, I found too with a friend actually mentioned to me before. She goes, "Do you know that the only thing you talk negatively about is your writing?" Like I
Mm,
found it really hard to accept that the book was actually published in the first place. I was absolutely convinced that it wasn't going to sell, it wasn't going to get published. So then when it was picked up, I found that really hard to connect the book with myself, that I had to take ownership over it. And I find taking praise with it very, very difficult. And like I nearly believe, your 1 star, your 2 star reviews more than the
yeah.
praise, that type of thing. So it's funny the way, and again, it's only just reflecting back on the situation and um all that type of thing that you realize, okay, wait a minute. I've been doing things probably for a long, long time, um nearly like masking, I
Mm.
suppose, and having to learn to put boundaries in place. I think it's putting boundaries in place for myself as well. And I've learned a lot of that through work really, and through writing as well. Just you have to put them up there for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that's an interesting way what you said about like like your friend noticed something
Yeah.
and like a lot of the time that is a really important kind of aspect to it that from the answers I get on this question from different people like it's one thing where we notice it ourselves, but sometimes it's very difficult to do that, when you're in the middle of something that's quite difficult. And
Yeah.
I think for the friends and for the people who are, listening maybe and they see something in their friends, they, you know, it's not don't feel like it's a bad thing to point it out to people, I guess.
Oh, 100%. Like, and the same, I've had friends who've gone through awful experiences with all sorts of different things. And it's when you're in the middle of that, it's very, very like you can't see it
Mm,
yourself. And it's very brave for somebody to step in and say, listen, I think you need a bit of help here. There's something going on. And it's when the seed is planted, I think. Like I had a friend who'd horrific postnatal depression. And I took her, like I took her aside and I said, listen, do you think you should like see somebody? There's something going on. And she said it took her a long, long time to accept it. A long, long time. She's like, no, like everything's fine. But once the seed was planted, she's like, okay, wait a minute, there is something not quite right here. And it takes courage to step in. And, you know, you're sort of thinking, oh, who am I to say
mm,
anything? But I think it is really important as well.
absolutely. So you mentioned that you didn't think you were going to be a writer, or you did maybe didn't
Yeah.
see yourself as a writer. What age were you then when you started writing?
Yeah, I was in my mid 30s, so it's really strange.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. So it's really bizarre. I don't even know where the idea came from that I wanted to be a writer. So I always loved reading. Like reading was huge for me. And my mom used to bring us down to the library in Blanchardstown, and there used to be a little mobile library used to come up to Hartstown then too. And we used to get out a load of books. Like we were always reading. Um, I just loved story and stuff like that. And even in English, I don't remember any of the creative writing element in my Leaving Cert English at
Mm.
all. Like I don't even remember any of the, like obviously we did an essay or something, but I don't remember any of that. And I loved English, but I loved the plays
Yeah.
and I loved the poetry and that type of thing. So I remember the story part of it. And yeah, no, so it was in my mid 30s, and I don't know what it was. Me and my husband, we were away for the weekend. It was a friend of ours who was getting married. And at the time when the kids were small, the only time you'd get away was a wedding. So we'd always
Mm.
make a sort of weekend to use the grandparents for a bit of extra time. And I do remember sitting down and saying to him that I want to be a writer. I remember being really nervous about it, saying, "Oh God," and like I'm going to tell him now that I want to be a writer, and like this is ridiculous. This is so ridiculous. Like, what? How,
Yeah.
basically, who do I think I am wanting to be a writer? This is really odd. But so I remember sitting down and saying, "Look, I think I really want to write, write a book." And he was like, "Yeah, just that's great. Yeah, go for it. Like, yeah, definitely go for it." And so that was it. That was I don't know where. I must have been thinking about it for a while, but I can't
Mm.
actually remember that. But I do remember sitting down and being really, really nervous, actually admitting that this was something that I wanted to do, which again, it's sort of strange.
Mm.
And it just took off from there, really. And I started writing when I started writing, I was writing little funny stories because I'm a primary school teacher, and
Yeah.
my biggest experience is with junior infants. So I was writing sort of little funny stuff for them, like little funny stories, and then for my own kids and stuff like that. And then I just started getting really into it. And the book that I wanted to write, I still haven't written it yet. It's sort of like a folk horror type thing, and
Right.
it was like it was awful. It was really, really bad. And so the laptop was like this ghost town of all these abandoned books that I started until I hit on this one, and it just felt different. It felt right. Um, yeah, it's really, really bizarre. And I think that part of that, coming to it that bit later, and I didn't know any writers, and like I'd never been to like, book launches or any of these type of things. I didn't even know. Like I remember I went to this it was like a sort of writing retreat type
Mm.
thing, and there was workshops in it and lots of different things. And I remember people were naming all these like literary magazines and naming all these really famous writers and everything. I hadn't a clue who any of them were, and I felt so out of place. I was like going, "Oh, look, what am I doing? Like, why am I here?" But yeah, I stuck with it.
But it's such a strange thing because you remind me of something there when you mentioned about being kind of nervous about telling someone because I had like people who will have listened to this podcast quite a bit will know that I had a breakdown like when I was about 27. Well, I was 27. And when I kind of came out of it, will say I said to myself, I'm going to write this as a novel, right? So I thought like this would be a bit, almost like some form of therapy, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I was so like embarrassed about what I was doing, like that I like my mom knew, I think my dad knew, and but I was like writing in the library, and I was just like, and I don't know. I'm trying to think now whether it was because I was like, I was going to worry about what people will say. Well, who's this guy think he is? Or whether I was worried that I'd have to tell people what it was about, and then they may connect the dots. But it's a and like you mentioned about critical kind of people telling you how great it is or whatever, and how you try to deal with that, and we'll talk a bit about it. So it's this thing, and I don't know if it's an Irish phenomenon, but we're certainly not great at praise and
Yeah.
that kind of coming out and saying, well, I want to be this, and we're kind of sheepish or meek about that kind of stuff, which is bizarre. But
Yeah.
um, when you were growing up and reading and stuff, like when I read a book like yours, and this is a bad habit I have of kind of thinking, I wonder where the influences are, or who's kind of top of the list of influences for you.
Yeah. In terms of writers, or
Yeah,
yeah, so like definitely Roddy Doyle. Like, I was a
right. Yeah.
massive fan of Roddy's, and anybody writing about ordinary people going,
Hmm.
that type of thing. Like, and Donal Ryan, I remember reading The Spinning Heart by Donal Ryan. And that book is what made me want to be a writer, because I was sort of, when I read that, he's writing about like that, ordinary people in their own language, going about like everyday lives, dealing with things like extraordinary things, and like everybody's extraordinary. That's the whole thing about it. And it's just that real focus on like a snapshot in time of like something that somebody's going through. So I was drawn to that type of thing. And when I was younger, it was Maeve Binchy. Like I remember, the way they have like they call it a young adult category or
Hmm.
whatever now. But when I was growing up, there was no such thing as young adult. You went into the library and you picked up whatever books you wanted. And I remember finding Maeve Binchy, and I remember distinctly I was about 11 and I picked up every single book that she wrote. I was engrossed in it. And looking back at that now, it's because how she writes character, and
Yeah.
she writes like real people, and there's real love in it as well for her characters and all of that type of thing. And I remember sitting on my nana's step, and I was there reading, I think it was Circle of Friends or something like that. And I was so engrossed in it. I was going back into the car, and I had the head in the book, and I closed the car door on my finger. The child lock was the child lock was on,
Whoa.
but I was so engrossed in that book I couldn't even put it down.
Yeah.
You know, and I have a real distinct memory of that. And then of course I read all of Marion Keyes, Stephen King, Agatha Christie. I was mad into you know, any crime. I read loads of all that type of stuff. Read everything like that. So I suppose there's loads of different influences like that, but now it's definitely my biggest influence. Well, for me, because when I read his work, I was like, okay, yeah, this is it. I really like, this is what writing is to me. Was Donal Ryan would be, I'd say, the biggest inspiration really for the writing.
And how strange was it to talk to him there recently?
Oh my God, I was so nervous. Do you know something? I was so close to saying no because of it,
Okay.
because of I was talking to somebody about this as well. And I went in, I'd be chatty, like, and I'd be sort of like, I love chatting with people and getting to know people. I think that's why I write, is because I love people and I love
Mm-hmm.
stories and listening to stories and all that type of thing. But I was going in, I was like, oh my God, like this is Donal Ryan. And he was at that writing retreat that I was in. It was he was given workshops and stuff on it. And I remember I had my copy of The Spinning Heart. That was in 2019. And I had a copy of The Spinning Heart in my on my possession for that whole like 5 days or whatever that retreat was on. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go up and I'm going to ask him just to sign it. And I remember him sitting opposite me, and he was just chatting to people. And I was too nervous. I couldn't even open my mouth. I couldn't even say hello, let alone ask him to sign the book. And yeah, for that, then when I was interviewing them there recently, I was very, very close to saying no, because I was like, oh, this is just really overwhelming, like
Mm.
interviewing him. And sure, he's such a lovely, lovely person. And I was so glad that I did it. But it was literally completely awestruck, because I remember even beforehand, before he went on, I was just rambling. Like I was even talking about, I feel like I'm on Drag Race, you know, when
Yeah.
RuPaul says, don't fuck it up in the lip sync. I was like, this is what I feel like. And I was rambling all this stuff to him. He was all, oh yeah. But he's so nice, and he made it really, really easy. And I'm so glad that I did it, because it was just, but yeah, I was completely awestruck and very, like, very awkward in myself. I was like, this is mad. Why am I like this? But it's because when you meet somebody who does inspire you like that, it's and like, just to be able to, you can't even express that to
Yeah.
somebody. It's sort of, everybody has that, and every writer will say there's something that sparked something in them when that they connected with. And I think that's what it is. It's definitely because the way he writes, and he writes the love and the care he shows his character, a bit like what I felt like with Maeve Binchy when I was reading
Yeah.
at that time. It's the love and care that he has for his characters, and the empathy in it, and that even if you're going through a really, really shitty, horrendous time, there is light at the end of the tunnel there. Like, there is it, like, light will always fight to get through into the dark. Like, it always will. And that's what I think you can see in his work. Even if it's really dark, there's still that sort of glimmer of hope there somewhere, you know.
Yeah, he is a brilliant writer. I remember his when his debut came out, and it was everywhere. It was one of those kind of, talked about by everyone, and it kind of like was kind of a must read, I guess,
Yeah.
at the time, and it was one of those ones that didn't kind of disappoint. Now this is going to be a fun section of the podcast, because I normally do an advert here. Okay, so right,
Right.
yeah, but right, this is the first time I think that I'm doing a different advert than the normal one. So I wore this. This is what I normally advertise. So there, the advert's there. Okay, right, fine. That's the gym I use, by the way. So this is going to be one. Now I'm going to tell you this, Fiona. I was literally falling asleep writing this yesterday, and that's not anything on the person or the. I was so tired, so I had to rewrite it, and there's like scribbles in it. So I hope I get it right. But we had Maria Burke on. People might have heard her on episode 127. I did a course with her. It was a 3-2-1 focus course. Go back to listen to the episode if you want to hear about my experience and what it's about. It's about gratitude and meditation, things like that. But for the course starting in November the 17th, if you want to do it, it's €55 offer at 70% off. Um, what's this to say here? I don't know. Streamlined daily practice. Oh yeah, sorry, 5 minutes streamlined daily practice and a one-line affirmation. That's happening now every day. Go to www.mariaburke.com to find out more. Maria, I can only apologize for the sloppiness of that advert, but I hope that's okay. But we'll get back to it. So The initial idea for
Yeah.
Boys Don't Cry.
Yeah, so it's mad. I was on Twitter and I was sort of like the usual scrolling away, like videos of cats or whatever it was. And I came across this tweet and it was from a pediatric palliative care doctor based in South Africa. And he had gone around the children in his care who were dying, and him and his nurses had asked them, like, what will you miss the most when you die, or what gave your life meaning? Because these were children who were terminally ill. And he'd written a list of stuff that the children had said. And it was just, of course, it was really moving. And it was just that spark. I just heard the voice of Finn saying all that. It was mad. It was just like he was there sitting on your shoulder nearly. And then I opened up a Word document and I just like wrote down the first chapter. And I know I've said this before and other things, it's identical to what's printed in the book now. It's more or less just came straight out. And that was sort of the initial inspiration for it. And originally, then I was going to write the book about Finn and his mother Annie. That was the perspective that I was going to go with, and that's what the story was going to be when I was sort of thinking about it in my head. But then when I actually went to write it, Joe just kept coming in. His voice was just a lot stronger. So I wrote it in the perspective of Joe and Finn. And again, I've talked about it loads. There's a lot of my dad and Joe, like particularly Joe, and he's a huge inspiration in the book. So there's a lot of him in the book as well. Lots of different things. And then when we were growing up as well in Dublin 15, there was a lot of drugs in the area as well. And the Westies were operating out of Cordoff, not too far away from us. That's where my dad was teaching. And you were sort of oblivious to it. Like I remember going in on the 39, you'd be going into town and stuff like that. And like the addicts and all that type of thing. It was just right next door to our secondary school where we were going up. It was one of the first rehabilitation centres that wasn't like a religious order, was in Coolmine, right next door to the school. So sort of, it was just such a mix. And that's one thing I think about Dublin 15 as well. It's such a mix demographically as well. Like you've got real deprived sort of areas, and then you have incredibly affluent, and it's all this stuff that's sort of like all mixed in there. Like lots of different things came from lots of different places for the book, I think.
Because you mentioned like Finn is 12 in the book and Joe is 17, and the difference between the two characters, I guess, more so the difference of what they're going through.
Yeah.
I can imagine, for to write about two different people, it seems quite hard to connect or make it kind of cohesive because it's tender in one spot and very tough in another.
Yeah, and that was the thing, like with Joe as well. So, like again, we've taught a lot of Joes. I knew a lot of Joes growing up as well, and like he's the eldest of the family. He's sort of shield and everything, and he's determined not only that he doesn't want to be like his dad, but he also doesn't want Finn to even sort of be in that world at all, or even to acknowledge that that's the way things are. And it's like a bit of personality too, like because Finn is really happy-go-lucky and sort of it's all that type of thing. And Finn was really easy to write actually, partly because of his personality, but also because his story was, you knew exactly what was going to happen to him. So there was no, and I remember I thought about that as well. Like he was always going to, like the reader was always going to know very early on that he was dead. So you more or less know from the very opening pages that he has died. So like it isn't a spoiler or anything at all like that. And I remember like it was well into the editing process that I said it to my editor, oh God, like should I change this now and make it that the reader doesn't know? Because like people were sort of like, oh God, do you know from the beginning, this type of thing. And then I was sort of getting a bit freaked out, not trusting it, going, oh God. And she was there, no, but like that's not the book you're writing. That like it'd be a completely different book. And that's not what you're writing. You're sort of doing this whole exploration thing, brief, all the rest of it. But Joe was really difficult to write because it like that sort of closed offness and shielding the whole time and not letting you get in. And I found that I was writing a lot of stuff that I cut eventually because I was explaining his actions away. And again, the editor was like, would Joe really do that? Would Joe really say that? I was like, of course he would. What are you talking about? Then I was like, no, he like he wouldn't. And it's okay to just leave it there. And it's okay that it's not all like tied up, or like it's okay that it's, because that's not real life either. And like to be able to talk about your feelings or anything at all like that. Like I know even my son now, he's almost 15, and one of his close friends, his dad died a couple of months ago very suddenly from cancer. He was diagnosed quite late, and like he was terminal at that stage. And like they'll go to the cinema and they'll do all this type of thing, and they'll go out and they'll meet up, whatever, but they don't ever talk about it, and you're sitting there going, it's, whereas I could see, I know this is really stereotypical now, but whereas I can see if something like that happened to my daughter, they'd be talking about
Mm-hmm.
it, they'd be hugging it, they'd be sharing it, and how are you feeling? Like it's very, very different way. And you're there. Is it society? Is it like, of course it is. There's lots of different things at play there. I remember reading an article there, oh, I think it was just before lockdown, and they were talking about how girls in a mixed school, like teachers have expectations. Oh, it was for, yeah, do you know what it was? It was during COVID and then was going into the predictive grading.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about how, or it was from the teachers, and they were talking about how girls were going to be missing out because girls are usually underestimated. And I was like, that was not the experience when I was growing up. Like, you go to any community school around like Dublin or probably any city, that's not the experience I had. It's the boys that are underestimated and that are falling out, or they're considered the class clown, or they're considered this, or
Yeah.
they're considered the other thing, like, and they can't talk about it. If something's going on at home, like, they're not going to go into their friends and say
Yeah.
things are really fucking shit for me at home at the moment.
Yeah. And we're like, we talk about that a lot on here as well, about the whole the the title of your book, Boys Don't Cry. Obviously it makes a lot of sense as what we're led to believe, I guess. And there was, when I first heard about the book, and my mom had read it, and she's we kind of share what we read, and sometimes I
Yeah.
give her books if I think they're good, but she said she was in bits, and she goes, I'm gonna have to give it to you, and you're gonna have to read it, right? So I always put up, before I read something, I put it up on Facebook or Instagram and stuff, just say what I'm reading and stuff. And a guest who was on, Joanne, she's on a couple of times, she was like, oh, you're gonna need your box of tissues, you're gonna be in bits. And I'm quite skeptical about that sometimes,
Yeah.
because like, even if you take for the spooky month we're in, you hear people going to horror films and they were getting sick in the cinema, and you're like, I don't know if they were, you know what I mean? Like, but and so I was reading it, and like you say, I'm not giving anything away here on the ending. Finn is gonna die, but that makes it even more
Mm.
shocking to me of the reaction that I got from it, because I knew it was going to happen, but it's the wording, it's your words at that moment, and I just got like this kick in the chest, this kind of, and I wonder, like, and I'm sure you've heard this back, how does, like, that's a massive thing for an author to achieve, to get that emotion from people, I think.
Do you know, it's really, yeah, it's great that you've said that. And thank you so much. Like, I always love hearing about readers. And that's the best thing I think about being a writer, is hearing from readers.
Mhm.
It's really humbling. But I remember, again, my editor, and the way that it has that tagline on the book, boys don't cry, but you will, or you might, or something.
Yeah.
And I absolutely was adamant I didn't want that on it. And I was there, we had some meeting, and I said to the editor, I really don't want that on it. And I hadn't put up with Anthony. I could be like, I was there, yeah, whatever goes, like, they know what they're doing. But I was really adamant I didn't want that on it. And I said, look, I don't want to tell readers how to feel.
Mhm.
I really don't want that. I want people just to read it. And she said, oh no, but you don't understand. She said, people have come to me and said, like what you said, they were really upset by it and they didn't realize how upsetting it was going to be. So you have to have some sort of like trigger warning, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to be upsetting. And I was really shocked because I didn't think it was going to be that sad for people, because exactly what you said, at the beginning that
Mhm.
he's dead. Like, he's writing from the perspective of being dead, like, and it's, yeah, so I was really, really shocked at the reaction to it, actually. I really didn't think it was going to be as upsetting or as impactful as it was going to be. But the one thing that I really wanted was that it was honest,
Mhm.
that it was not being sort of, what would you call it, exploitative or anything at all like that of a child dying,
Mhm.
and one of the things that I did do to sort of research first was I read a lot of blogs from the perspective of siblings and parents who had lost a child to cancer. And I just wanted to make sure that that was real. And of course, like reading through the tweets and stuff like that, and reading through doctors' sort of journals, and just, I didn't want it all sort of medical jargon bogged down, but
Yeah.
I wanted the feelings to be real. And another thing that I sort of did as well is I listened to, there's certain music that I don't listen to music when I write, but as soon as I finish the scene, I listen to a lot of music, or before I start a scene, I'd listen to a lot of music. And one thing that I wanted was, like, there's songs that you listen to and you get a feeling when you're listening to it. So that's what I wanted for the reader, that, like, to get a feeling of something. And I think from, I don't know, from listening to the music, like the feeling that I wanted in a scene, I listened to music that wanted me to sort of tap into that type of feeling
Right.
and then write the scene, or I'd listen to it on loop then afterwards, stuff like that.
It's the artistic, the kind of creative moments that we that you or other creative people might find. Like
Yeah.
it's the idea of I was reading about this the other day, and I think I read it before about David Bowie, and he got this idea from oh, I can't remember the American writer's name, but he had writer's block, so it's like, what can I do? I'll chop up all these words, stick them in a hat, and pick them out at random, and then have the sentence, and you can hear in the songs he was writing at the time, and like it's about, isn't it? Well, I guess it's about finding that process that helps you, and you might even use that in the next one.
Yeah. And that's the whole thing. And I'd say that to anybody. I think everyone's creative. Everybody else has like a creative person or a writer is this and a writer is that. Like, and I'm there, no, because I don't know, is it the teacher in me or what, but I hate that boxing in. I hate
Mm.
like you have to be a certain way to be this. And you're like, what? No. Um, and yeah, it is. It's finding what works for you. And everybody has all these like writing advices, and you should be doing this and you should be doing
Yeah.
that. You should be hitting your word target and you should be doing. As soon as you start doing all that, you're putting pressure on yourself. Like, yeah, it's great. If that works for you, that's absolutely brilliant. But that's not going to work for somebody else. That's going to send them crazy. And guilt, then you're going to feel guilt. Like I found that last year as well, is I was on career break and I had the whole year and I was like, this is great. I'm a whole year now and I can write. It was my most unproductive year in
Mm.
terms of writing because and then I felt really guilty. I was like, oh God, I had all this time and I got feck all writing done. And you're there, but look, you have to find what works for you. Like the
Mm.
only thing is it has to get written. Like it does have to
Yeah,
get
of
written.
course.
But you don't have to write every day. You do what works for you. If listening to music helps you, listen to the music. If putting a timer on and writing for half an hour helps you, do that. If it's reading and you're always writing. So if you're out, like I'm walking down the road and I'm daydreaming about something or I'm thinking about a character or I'm reading a book or I'm watching a series, like I'm watching Bad Sisters at the moment, and
Mm.
it's absolutely brilliant. The characters in it are brilliant, the writing's brilliant, and it's so you're surrounded. That's the one thing with writing, you're surrounded by stories all the time. So even when you're not on the page writing, you are still being absolutely immersed in writing and stories and people telling you what they did at their break time or you never guess what happened to me. Like that's all
Yeah,
story.
it's absolutely right. Um, so actually, William S. Burroughs is the name of that American writer. Sometimes
Oh yeah.
it takes my brain just a little bit to catch up with my mouth. But then, so for you, and you mentioned this about acclaim, and you were the book was called "Astonishing" by the Independent, and even Marion Keyes she has a little blurb on the book saying how beautiful it is. Like, I know it. Like you said, you're humbled by it, but you also have said you're maybe a little bit uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, very, very, very uncomfortable with it. And that's something that I really noticed in this whole process is because I like writing the book and editing the book like that was great and linking in and everything, but it's the whole marketing side. I am so uncomfortable with that. Like I can't even go into a bookshop and say that's my book. Like it's mad. And
Yeah,
people then think you're snubbing them.
yeah,
It's not. It's like and like I find that side really, 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 really difficult. And again, it is actually taking ownership over it, saying, I actually did write that book and, it did well or whatever. I find that really hard to say. Even now, I find it really difficult to say that, like, it did well. And, someone asks you, how's the book doing? Sure, it was grand. This
yeah,
it's the usual Irish thing, I think, as
yeah.
well. It's so bizarre. And, like, that's one thing that I've said to myself for going forward that, like, you have to connect yourself with this thing that you did and yeah, take the ownership over it. And it's very bizarre. And then you keep thinking, sure, they're only saying that, or should they say that to everybody,
Mm.
or all these type of things. And I remember my editor again, she sent me it was another book. She asked me would I read it and to like write a little, they ask you to write, a little blurb or quote for
Mm.
it. So I read it anyway and I put something up on Twitter just saying how much I enjoyed. And she contacted me and she goes, oh, do you mind if I put that, on as a quote or whatever? And I said, oh yeah, sure. I didn't think that's what you wanted me to do. And she's like, why would I send it? Of course, that's what I want you to do. Like you're after selling your book and you've been really successful. Why wouldn't
Yeah.
I want you to do it? And then I was like, oh, actually, this is really bad now. I'm going to have to stop like apologizing for everything all the time. But it's a struggle. That is, I find that really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's curious that the kind of that idea, like I I've been through like therapy a number of times, and I just finished up my latest kind of batch or whatever you want to call it, my latest segment of therapy. But I was talking a bit about self-worth in it. Like I'm not saying that this what it is, but this is just
Yeah.
kind of an idea around of being even having this podcast, like and talking to people that I was like yourself and like people who um creative people. I told you I had Lisa McInerney on. There was another one where I was kind of like, who am I to be asking this person question? It just immediately comes into my. That's the first thing that comes into my mind when you said you'd come on. That's the first thing, and then after that, I need to work. Get past that and work towards like, well, it's just two human beings having a
Yeah.
chat. Like, it's not just calm down.
Yeah.
But it is a little bit of that. It's a little bit Irish. It goes without saying that that's the way we're not supposed to be taking compliments as easily as maybe Americans who are great at taking compliments.
Yeah.
And great at giving compliments as well. It's a weird thing, and I'm not saying that like everybody needs to have a look at their self-worth, because it's not all about that, but it's certainly something within us, a generation thing that's been passed down to us, where we're supposed to kind of go, yeah, like even if we've written a brilliant book like you have, and you're just like, yeah, yeah, no, yeah, it's sheepish in it.
Yeah, but it's, 100% is self-worth. Like it definitely is. And that you can't even acknowledge it. Like you're like,
Mm.
and even I remember when it sold, I kept saying, oh, sure, that's a mistake. They're going to say no now. And
Yeah.
oh, is it really coming out? And oh, is it not just going to be this? Is it not because it's completely that
Mm.
you can't accept that you've done something like this. But it is something that I do really want to work on,
Mm.
because even not only for myself, for your kids as well.
Of
Like you want
course.
to be able to, that like be proud of your achievements, like, and it's something, yeah, that I'm definitely working on, to be able to be proud of stuff that you've done.
Yeah, I'd like to be proud and like pass that idea on to the kids as
Yeah,
well, which is huge,
yeah.
you know. So when you think about like the second book, it's always, I don't know if it's a difficult thing, but in music you always hear of the difficult sophomore album, that Nirvana had and all that. I'm
Yeah.
sure you've been well aware of this phenomenon, but how do you feel about the second one?
Oh, it's exactly the same in books as well.
Okay,
The second one is
okay,
Hell on Earth, and I think it's hellish if you haven't got it finished before the first one comes out. So I know I have a friend now, and it's her third one is The Killer, because she had her second one written before the first one was published. So
okay.
with me, I was sort of half and half in that camp. So I was convinced that the book first one wasn't going to sell. That went out on submission to publishers, and then lockdown happened. It literally went out on submission to publishers a week before everything
Oh,
shut down. So again, I was completely convinced then, look, sure, that's the end of it now. And even my agent, she was all, look, we haven't a clue what's going on. Maybe we'll pull it and resubmit it again in September when things are back to normal. When you think about it now, like, so that was around
yeah.
the March time. But so what I did was I was teaching. So it was 2 weeks before the Easter holidays. So I was like, okay, we have 2 weeks before the Easter holidays. Then we have 2 weeks of Easter holidays, and we'll all be back into work again. And isn't that great? Now I have 4 weeks now to sort of just get down. I'd been thinking about the book in my head, so I got up early for those 4 weeks, and I just, before the kids or whatever up, and I cracked on, and I got half of the novel written in those 4 weeks.
Oh,
And then sure, then the book sold and everything else took off. Trying to get back to that book and to get it finished was so hard. And it's definitely a psychological thing. It's this absolute fear. Like I can't even explain it. It was so hard. And even I got a first draft written quite quickly, and just I could not get back into it. I couldn't even look at it. And I knew it had to be done. And there wasn't even that much like really in terms of fixing it up. But it was just, I left it for, I'd say, the guts of a year really before I went back to it again, because it was an absolute fear in my head about having work out there again, and that there could be a possibility. It wasn't even that it would be rejected. Like, as I said, I actually am much more comfortable with it being rejected. Like I'm much more comfortable if I was told, no, sorry, this isn't for me, or it's not going to work, than if they take it on. It's really bizarre. But sure, look, loads of people go through that. But yeah, it's really, 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 really difficult. Book two is
mm.
really hard. Yeah. To get your
Especially, I
head.
guess, after something that's so successful. Obviously, that makes a big difference, because
Yeah.
you like there's sometimes you hear about like a band or a filmmaker or something, and obviously a writer as well, like that maybe has one or two books out there and they haven't sold many, or the
Yeah.
expectations have been met, and then all of a sudden this third one comes in with a bullet, like. And I guess you're in the same kind of category as Donald Ryan and Lisa McInerney, really, who had big starts of their career, and you're trying to follow on from that. But like I think maybe the attitude of the pessimistic side of people in Ireland could maybe help with that. That like well, we'll see, rather than being like
Yeah.
American and all like freaked out about the whole thing, because it's such a, you have to do it now.
Yeah, do you know, it's mad because like that, I'm definitely like, I'd be like what when my friend said that to me, I'd be very optimistic, very happy go lucky, all the rest of it, except with the writing. But it is
Yeah.
a protection. Of course, it's a protection. Like, sure, like what else? So you're very vulnerable with your writing because it's
Mhm.
just you making it up and putting it out there. And again, I was just really lucky that I had a fair bit of it started before it was ever published. So I knew what the story was before it was published. And the other thing as well was my book wasn't expected to do well at all. It was like a complete fluke, because it went out to 12 publishers. One said yes, like that was it. It was the same when I was looking for agents. Like people were saying, oh, we love this story. But what I heard over and over and over and over again is we don't know how to sell this book. We don't know
Mhm.
where to place it. And what they say in like the book language is we don't know where this fits on the shelf. So basically we don't know what box to put you in here because like, we don't know.
Yeah.
And I think I was just lucky as well that when it came out, is that it came out in the middle of all, the shite that was going on. But people were looking for short reads. They were looking for an easy
Yeah.
read. They were looking for something that they could just pick up and completely escape from whatever else was going on. So I think timing as well with mine, it just sort of took off that way because mine was really like it was word of mouth. Like, because I know even bookshops and stuff like that said the word of mouth for the book just sort of spread, and like that loads of book clubs and stuff took it on, and
Yeah.
libraries were absolutely brilliant. I got so much support from people. Like I'll be so like I'm forever grateful to the bookshops and the libraries and all the readers who passed it on and spread the word, and schools as well. Secondary schools have taken it up and they've been incredibly supportive. They've been doing it with their students, and like it's unbelievable. But I do think there was something in that as well, that it came out at a time where people's concentration were like, I know
Yeah.
myself, my reading went to crap. It's still not back properly to what it was before. And the thoughts of picking up a big, like you look at a book and it's intimidating, nearly looking at the
Yeah.
length of it, because people just weren't in the right headspace for that at the time. I don't think so. I had a lot of luck on my side as well.
Um, I think have you had you're busy, I know you've got the job, obviously you're a teacher, you're writing, you've got kids and like and you mentioned you haven't quite got into the space of reading, but do you ever have time to read with all of that going on?
Yeah, but you know what it was? It's mad. It's like I found out as well when I took career break last year that I actually love being busy. That I've
Hmm.
never like and always go, go, go. And that's the whole thing. Again, it's all this reflection that goes on. And there's a reason for that, like, but it's I thrive on being busy and I thrive on having loads of stuff to do. So I didn't really know what to do with myself when I didn't have that busyness anymore. Um and yeah, it's funny now because I did find out though in the last year that I actually don't want to write full time. I was really, really
Right.
lucky that I got an Arts Council grant, which allowed me to take the year from work. And I've continued it on to this year. And I'm now writer in residence in Maynooth University. So again, and what I found was last year when I didn't have anything like that, I really missed teaching. I really missed like interacting with my colleagues and stuff like that. And as I said before, like I definitely think the reason that I write is because I love story. Like I just love
Mm.
people and their stories and listening to people and all that type of thing. So when I was starting here in Maynooth and I'm taking a semester with I think second or third years in creative writing, I have a 10-week block teaching. I was so excited about that. And it's not till like February or January, February. But I've already have all these ideas and getting excited about it again. I was like, yeah, I did really miss this, but I can't go back to teaching again because it was just too full on trying
Mm.
to write a book, edit the book. Like when the day the book was published, I was in work and I completely underestimated the amount of time it takes to launch the book, even though it was online. So I was in work till whatever time it was. And then I was home, like my parents, like when I think about it now, mom and my brothers, and like they came to the garden and they had to leave presents in the garden because it was lockdown and you weren't
Oh
allowed to
yeah.
play in and all this type of thing. And in work then as well, they had a cardboard cut out of me. They took a picture of me with the book, and then they had this big cardboard cut out of me. And at the time as well, you weren't allowed to have staff meetings or anything at all. Like, it was so ridiculous. The
Yeah.
classrooms and the schools were all in, but you weren't allowed to like gather. So the principal after school just called me and she goes, "Oh, I have something to show you in the hall." And like all the staff were sort of socially distanced around and all the doors open in the hall. And they had the big cardboard cut out of me with the book and like a bottle of champagne and balloons and cake and stuff. And I still hadn't accepted that my book was being published. It was so
Yeah.
odd. But like people in my life have been so kind and so supportive with the book as well. And I found it much harder when I was going into the staff room. They're like, "Oh, I'm reading your book. Like, it's brilliant." It's much harder when people are reading it. See,
Yeah.
with my mom and brothers and sisters and stuff, I was like, God, it's really weird. People, like strangers are fine, but like people,
Yeah.
reading, like, oh God, what are they
Yeah.
thinking?
It's weird. That's weird because it's kind. You feel a little bit like cringy or something. There's something kind
Yeah.
of strange about it. But do you know something? I just popped into my head. It'd be a nightmare. Seeing a cardboard cutout of myself. I think that'd
It
be.
was so bizarre. In fairness, like they made sure it was a nice enough, but it was in the mask as well, like because of all of
Oh,
that.
yeah, of
But it was
course.
then,
Yeah.
because then all the kids were going past, and all the kids knew about it and everything, because they'd teachers have been telling them. Everybody was really proud, like it was
Yeah.
so nice. But like the kids were in the PE hall playing football with the cardboard cutout, like all this all this type of thing, and it's still there, even though I'm on career break. Like there's me, the big cardboard cutout holding my book, still pride of place in the hall. It's mad.
Very, very odd. But did you know? Yeah, well, I guess people often think of writers as people who like to be recluse and to be on their own and that's an interesting thing that you say. Like it seems that that's not the point for you or something that's really um something that makes you happy. It's you like to be amongst people,
Yeah.
hearing and telling
Yeah.
stories and then maybe bringing them into your
Yeah.
work.
And that's the thing. That's why I think it's dangerous, like all the stereotypes around writing in particular, because especially if you're coming to writing later, and especially if you think if you're lacking confidence in it or something that you think you could never do, there's people out there who always wanted to write and they say, oh, sure, like that's nothing, like I could never do that.
Mm.
So I think like by saying that as a writer, you have to be a certain way and you have to be this, and like writers are like they'll say, oh, you have to mind like because of X, Y, and Z. I think it's the same with everything though. Like who says you can't be a writer just because of you know I just think it's like for me, if I can write, anyone can write, and I really do believe that anyone can write a book. And you can hear there are writers who get really annoyed when someone says, oh, like I've always you see these threads coming up all the time on Twitter or whatever other places saying what's annoying to you what someone says to you as a writer. And it comes up time and time again. They say, oh, when people come up to you and say, oh, I've always wanted to write a book, or there's a book in me. And I was like, why would you be annoyed by that? Like, why
Yeah.
wouldn't you say, just, yeah, do it? I was you once as well. Like, if you want to write a book, just to go, it doesn't matter if it takes you 10 years, like, go and do it. Like, if it's something that you've always wanted to do. So that always sort of, like, I was always there going, why would you be annoyed by
Yeah.
saying that they wanted to write?
Yeah, I mean, it's a positive thing, like But so for you, right? So I have to ask this question. So, what is your favorite book?
Oh, well, now I've a few. The
Right.
Spinning Heart, just because the
Hmm.
impression that it made on me. But I remember from books that made a big impact on me. I remember when I was younger, my godmother, the very first books that I remember being bought. I remember in our house we had it was like an orange sort of hardback, big hardback thing of Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. I used to love that book. Um, and then I remember my godmother, when I was about 6, I'd say, she bought me The Twits and George's Marvelous Medicine. And the Twits I read, I don't know. I still have that copy here, like with the inscription from my aunt on it. And I just love that book so much. So that
Mm.
one as well, because I still think about it now. And I remember doing the witches with kids in school. You could hear a pin drop
Mm.
because the impact that he had. So that's one. And then I remember reading Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale as well. And I just thought that just I was probably about 16 or something like that. So I have different books at different stages in my life, but it would probably have to be, you'd have to, I always say Donal Ryan's The Spinning Heart, just because that was like the moment that I said, okay, this is what I want to do. This is like I want to be able to write like that.
For sure, yeah. Do you think this is kind of based off, like, I guess, your own book, but maybe exaggerate a little bit, for effect? I don't know. But can a work of art be so devastating or upsetting that you never want to go back to it?
Oh yeah, yeah.
But I mean, you can enjoy it when you're watching it because I think or reading it or listening to
Yeah,
it, whatever. But like then you're like, I can't
yeah.
go through it again.
Oh yeah, definitely. I hate rereading stuff and I hate
Yeah.
rewatching stuff. And I really do believe that you have to be in a certain frame of mind for things. Like there's things that you love because of certain things, like whatever happened at your stage of your life that makes you connect to it in that way. And one of my favorites, and I do reread The Spinning Heart, like I do just because it gives me inspiration. But other things, you're sort of there going, that's a moment in time and you loved it then. So
Mm.
why are you going to go and rewatch it now again or reread it again? And then you end up absolutely hating it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I do think that as well. And it's Yeah, I don't like, there's very, very, very few things that I'd reread or rewatch. And I remember over lockdown, I went back to Breaking Bad and I rewatched the whole thing. I absolutely love that show. And the second time around, I was like, oh God, this is just such good television. It's
Yeah.
such good writing. The characters are all incredible. I'm so glad that I actually rewatched it again. But it takes a lot for me to go back and rewatch something because I like how you felt and how it was captured in that moment of time. And I'd hate to lose that then by rereading it or rewatching it or whatever.
Completely understandable. And it makes I think it makes more sense to me if I rewatch films, because films you don't have to invest as much time,
Yeah.
into a film as a book. But I've fallen into that trap that you were mentioning about something that you loved, like maybe when you were young or in your teens and whatever, and you watch it again and it's dreadful, and
Oh, it's
you've
awful.
it's weird, but you've lost that. Then that's kind of
Yeah.
gone, and
Yeah.
I kind of based this question when I was writing it. I watched that Andrew Dominic film Blonde about Marilyn Monroe that's on
Oh,
Netflix,
yeah.
and it's not a good film,
Yeah.
so it doesn't really count for this question. But it's particularly hard watch, that kind of, to
Yeah.
see somebody go through that much, whether they exaggerated a little bit or not. Regardless, we
Yeah.
know someone like that went through a very hard time, and it seems a bit strange to kind of sit there and watch it
Yeah.
happening. But I did tell people not to watch it because it's absolutely a horrible film, and that's just obviously my own opinion. But it's just that idea of, it just like reading something that upsets you,
Yeah.
and then kind of saying, well, I think I might leave that where it is now. It's done
Yeah.
its purpose. This is something I asked a couple of writers as well, and it's do you think, like, if you're reading a novel, do you think it's okay for an author to write in a voice that they haven't experienced? Now I'm not talking full cultural appropriation, that kind of thing, because
Yeah.
there's a very murky world, but kind of the idea, and it's come up once or twice recently, and I'm sure you've seen these things
Yeah.
on Twitter all the time. Do you think it's okay?
Well, I think with everything, like your job as a storyteller, like it's fiction, you're sort of making up a story. And I completely agree, you're not appropriating somebody else's culture. Um, Everything you come to, you have to come with respect and you have to come with empathy and you have to come with truth and be true to the characters in your book. So I think if you're approaching it from a place of respect and truth and empathy, yes, then you can and you should be able to tell the story that you want to tell, but exactly that you're not being disrespectful or taking over somebody else's life as yours.
Mm. I think that you explained that really well earlier on when you read about people who lost young people to cancer and stuff, and I do think that you know I I think it's in danger of going from being worried about cultural appropriation to being, we can only talk about the bracket of salary that our parents earned when we were young and
Oh, look,
those
yeah,
experience.
yeah. And I heard it's sort of going to real extremes now. And I heard Mallory Blackman speak about this before, and she's a children's writer and young adult writer, and she's a black woman, and she said that it's gotten to the stage now where if you are a minority writer, that it's expected that you write about hardship
Hmm.
and trauma and discrimination. So she said, for example, she wrote a book and sent it to her editors. This is about 10 years ago. She said it could even be longer now. And it was about two black children and they were magic, like they had magic. And when she gave it to her editor, the editor was like, oh, yeah, but like no one's going to believe that. And she goes, what do you mean believe it? I'll believe that they have magic. And it's the same like with the Little Mermaid outroar now over,
Yeah,
oh, a mermaid can't be black. It's just like what
it's
is going on? And the same way, so if you're gay, you can only write about being gay, but in a really destructive way about
mm,
trauma, a traumatic experience of coming out, or traumatic experience about homophobia, or if you're black, of racism, or whatever it may be. Whereas I read a book there recently, oh God, I'm going to remember this. You made a fool out of death with your beauty, and it's by a Quake. This is terrible.
that's
I'll
all right.
I'll send you the name.
Yeah.
But basically, it's a romance novel, and she's written other novels, or they've written other novels, and this one is basically, it is a romance. It's a love story, and every character in it just happens to be black, but it's not mentioned at all. Like it's
Yeah,
not do you know what I mean? It's not a thing. It's
nothing.
a
Yeah.
romance, and people gave out about that. They're like, oh, where's this and where's that? And, and same way as with, you see it with Bridgerton and with the casting, they're like, oh, but back in Regency times, Black people wouldn't have been treated as equals here. But this is like, this is made up. Like, why can't you
Yeah,
have a fiction show with a Black character who has this going on? So I think it's much more heavily narrowing for writers of minority grouping, where we should be like, it should be opened up, why it's
it's
so there is,
weird.
yeah, and there is, thankfully, there's a lot more happening, and there's a lot more happening in the industry, but that has to happen from like the top down. Like there has to be more like Black editors, for example, or Black agents, or in the industry itself, and there needs to be programs in place in schools and certain areas or whatever it is, to show this is a job that you can do. So like the whole industry has to change, rather than, okay, we're going to take a percentage of minority writers now and they're going to write about minority issues and that's our job done. It's, and I think it is sort of coming out of that a little bit more now. It's sort of becoming, hopefully, actually really more inclusive and diverse.
Yeah, like, because it is racist in itself to suggest that Black people should
Yeah,
only write about, and gay people should only write about
yeah.
it's silly, really. But this is a kind of a redundant question, but it seems, because you're so busy all the time. But what do you like to do in your spare time?
Oh, well, I love, again, like it's back to the story again. I love films, watching TV,
Hmm.
love TV, love films, love going to the cinema. Going to the cinema is one of my favorite things to do. Music as well. Like I did music in my undergrad.
Oh,
So listening to music, playing music, that type of thing, even though I don't do as much as what I used to do. Um, yeah, that type of thing.
well, that's all right. I mean, there are good things, and this you can see I've got a film poster here, and I've got a lot of film stuff around me. And anytime someone mentions films, I have to ask the question. It's part of the podcast. Do you have a favorite film?
Everyone always slacks me over this because it's Moulin Rouge.
Actually, no, no, I'm not. Well, I'm not, Fiona. I'm not going to do that, because I do think that is a good film, a
Yeah,
very good soundtrack, very flashy,
yeah,
as you'd expect from Baz Luhrmann. I watched his Elvis film a couple of weeks ago,
yeah.
and it was crazy, because you're expecting a straightforward. I don't know why I was expecting anything straightforward from Baz Luhrmann, but it was very glitzy and glamour. And did you see it?
No, I haven't seen it yet, but my mom has. I know I've loads of different favorites, but like that, I
Yeah.
remember growing up when they'd have like the big movie on
Mm,
RTE or whatever it was, and they'd always have the old fashioned black and white films. And I remember sitting with mom and we've watched about all Betty Davis ones. Like
yeah.
I became obsessed with Hitchcock around the same time when I was reading as well. Absolutely obsessed, and I'd watch all his films over and over and over again. Um, I love watching crime stuff and
Mm,
more for TV, like sort of short crime dramas. But yeah, Rebecca is another one that I'd
yeah.
be always up there, because it just reminds me so much. Anytime it was on, mom would let us stay up late to watch it. Then they're like, there's Jaws, stuff that just you have a
Yeah.
connection with. Goodfellas, The Godfather, like loads. I love TV
That's
and
a
love
that's a
film.
great mixture of films, to be fair.
Yeah.
Um, Fiona, if people want to follow you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on, the only thing I'm on is on Twitter. So I'm on that at Scarlett for you.
Yeah.
So you'll find me there and link in and I'll follow back.
And but buy the book, most important, because go read the book. Honestly, it's absolutely brilliant. Fiona, you've been on a wet Sunday afternoon, a pleasure to chat with.
And I was delighted to be here. Thanks so much for asking me. It was great.
That's all right. If you wouldn't mind sticking around for 1 minute, I'll close it out, get a quick photo for the old promo,
Yeah,
and we'll go. Is that all right?
good stuff. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I also need to thank John for doing all his tech stuff. I always thank my mum, my dad, my granddad, and Jaron Calvin for the graphics and the music. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and we're on 7 podcast platforms. Just read that today, 142 episodes in. I found that out, but I always have 4 out. So Apple, Spotify, Anchor, and Google Podcasts will be the kind of main ones, I guess. Thank you to everyone for watching and for listening. And obviously we're going to be back next week. Fiona, thanks a million.
Thank you. Great.
Take care, everyone. Talk soon. Bye.